You got to get into the mind of your person you're profiling, and that's the only way to do it. If you can't separate yourself from the insanity of your and of course they're not insane because you can't catch them, and the reason you can't catch them is because they look normal. But you have to get into their minds. You have to understand where they're coming from, who they are. And usually we don't figure this out until later, after we caught them and we talked to them. And this is one of the reasons that we're having problems with the guy from Las Vegas. Because he's dead, and he didn't leave anything. He wasn't on social media, so we have no idea what's on his mind. He didn't leave any notes. We're just kind of piecing things together, and we haven't come up with anything yet.
I wonder if we have like a really big steak dinner or something, you know.
And there was a steak that made him shoot people?
No, no, I mean like...
I had a steak on Saturday. Oh my God. And I was at a hotel too, so I could have... No, I didn't shoot anybody. Hardly shot anybody. Didn't shoot hardly anybody. Actually, there were Navy guys. They were having the Navy ball at the hotel where we were. So there's all these Navy guys wandering around. They're so different, aren't they? I know. They are so weird. So there were a lot of women with dresses that were almost not there. Navy wives. Lots of ink. I swear I've never seen so much ink in my life. Navy wives. Bizarre. Just bizarre stuff. I don't know. Okay, so we're going to talk about evaluating criminal suspects. Behavioral scientists and police use criminal profiling to narrow criminal investigations to suspects who possess certain behavioral and personality features that were revealed by the way that the crime was committed. And usually we can figure this out. So we can focus on a select group of individuals. When we're talking about mass murderers, who are we talking about? If we had to profile them today, what do they look like? Can we draw a picture of what this guy looks like? Looking at all the mass murderers we know. White.
Male.
Male. Hardly any females. Almost all white.
Well educated.
Relatively well educated. Tends to be, right?
Handsome features?
I'm sorry?
Handsome features, like Ted Bundy?
Just Ted. Was anybody else handsome?
Well, maybe in certain
Antisocial
ways.
personality disorder, they're able to get away with stuff because they're pretty and people don't call them down for all the crap that they do. That's a possibility. But would you call the guy, the shooter in Las Vegas, pretty?
I don't know, let's see him.
Okay.
There you go.
64 years old, white, thinning hair, white hair, thinning hair. I don't know.
It was too far away from me.
Right. But, of course, we've seen the picture of the guy that did it. So, he was white.
How do you know if that's a real picture of him?
You mean if he was actually the shooter?
Yes.
Or if somebody else shot him, well, how would they have escaped?
I'm sorry, I think you did the line of
No. No, that was actually him. And they think that he was the only shooter, so. Profilers typically must have experience as a criminal investigator. Usually that's what happened. We almost hired somebody that had worked as a profiler, but we weren't able to do it because, well, I already told you the story of why we didn't hire that lady. Because they took the job away from us. Only 10% of the psychologists and psychiatrists surveyed reported any profiling experience. And of course, this is a problem as well. So this is difficult. This is not the easiest thing in the world. The major source of research and development on criminal profiling has been the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, and I think there's a television show about this. Criminal Minds is about this unit, which has been working on criminal profiles since the 1970s. And they keep accumulating more and more information about what these people look like, The closer you can get to identifying them, the more likely that you will catch them before they kill too many people. Of course, that's what the television show is about. There's an active case and they're chasing this guy down, and they catch them just before they kill the last person, or the next person, I guess. Much of the historical focus on the BSU was on violent offenders, especially those who commit bizarre and repeated crimes. And of course, this is what we're looking for. It's a lot easier, the more bizarre, the more they commit these crimes. If somebody murders one person, it's really difficult to figure out who they are from the one crime scene. But if you have multiple crime scenes, and the crime scenes are similar, or there is a similarity between the crime scenes, then it's possible to put a profile together of what this guy looks like. Now, it's not that you want this to happen. You don't want anybody to murder anybody, but if they happen to murder one person, you hope it doesn't happen again. But if it happens again, and you get an individual that it seems to be a repeat offender, now we need to figure out who this person is so that we can stop them next time. That's what we're after. We're trying to stop them next time. I've got a bunch of serial killers. I've got pictures of serial killers or mass murderers. These aren't mass murderers. These are Russians, actually. Profilers have interviewed those who have committed a specific type of offense in order to learn how they select and approach their victims, how they react to their crimes, what demographic or family characteristics they share, and what personality features might predominate among them. And of course, we did this with Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy collaborated with 3 different people on biographies, and as it turns out, of course, all 3 of them are different. He created different personas for each of his biographers. So, and then that's a kind of a problem, because we look at these cases and try to figure out why they came up with what they did. And that's what we're trying to do with the shooter in Las Vegas. We're trying to figure out why he did it so that we can stop it from happening again. What do we know about the guy that shot up Las Vegas? That killed 59 people. That's a lot of people.
He was wealthy?
He was wealthy. Normally we don't see that. Normally wealthy people don't shoot the place up. Sometimes they'll commit crimes and assume that they're going to get off. I mean, isn't it Donald Trump that during the campaign he said he could shoot somebody on 5th Avenue in New York City and get away with it? Didn't he say that? He actually, yeah. I mean,
Lose votes.
I'm sorry?
He said he wouldn't lose any votes.
Yeah, he wouldn't lose any votes just for killing somebody. Just for killing somebody. Okay, yeah, he wouldn't lose any votes. Okay, so wealthy people usually don't do these kinds of things. They don't have to. They can hire somebody to do it for them, I guess. But here's a relatively wealthy individual. This guy claimed, and this is in 2013, that he gambled $1 million a day. He gambled $1 million a day. Now, we haven't found out how much money the guy actually had, or has, or whatever. We don't know what his estate looks like. But it would be interesting to find out how many millions of dollars he has. It'd be interesting to find out how many billions of dollars Donald Trump actually has. Because we have no clue. We haven't seen his tax return. What else do we know about the shooter?
He's an older gentleman.
He was 64. That's not very old, is it?
He was a gun collector.
Only recently. So he didn't have a strange fascination with weapons. Some people have a fascination with guns, and that's what we said about the kids. Remember, we said the kids that were school shooters, they had a fascination with guns. This guy did not have a fascination with weapons for an extended length of time. It's just recently. As a matter of fact, last year, he acquired 33 different weapons.
In 1 year?
In 1 year. In 4 different states. And he passed all of his, he bought them all legally. They were all legal. And the bump fire stocks that he had were all legal. Yeah. But not for long. It looks like that might not last forever.
Do they have some kind of like mental illness?
They did the autopsy, and they said that they looked at his brain and they saw no abnormalities whatsoever. But they're going to do that was the macro investigation of his brain. They're going to do a micro investigation of his brain to see if there's any telltale signs of something. Wow, this is a tough one, isn't it? Because I don't want to be shot by anybody, let alone somebody with $1 million or $5 million or whatever. I don't care. I don't want to be shot by anybody. But I don't want anybody. I don't want any of you to be shot by any of these people just because you happen to go to a country and western concert and lost life. But he'd gone to 3 other concerts.
Sorry. That's my fault.
We'll all start dancing.
Sorry.
We'll all start dancing.
Go ahead.
Anything else? Do we know anything else about this guy?
Why did he send his wife out of the country
Girlfriend.
3 months before, you know, I think it was 3 months before. And another thing too is like, how
It was
did
only
he
a
get-
month.
How did he get all those guns up there and nobody questioned it?
I don't know. How often you've been in a hotel? You were just in a hotel. You were just in Las Vegas a couple of weeks ago. How many security people do you remember running into? People with guns. Did anybody carry your stuff upstairs for you?
No, but there was 2 security officers when we were leaving Reno, and there was a lady in the hotel that was crying, saying that somebody stole all her stuff.
Somebody stole all of her stuff?
Yeah, so those were the only securities that we seen. There was absolutely no security whatsoever. Nobody carried our stuff. It was just...
I check into motels from time to time and nobody cares what I'm carrying upstairs. Nobody watches me. I can go up every 5 minutes I can take another box of ammunition upstairs if I want to. Or I can put a rifle in a broken down rifle that fits in a suitcase. Yeah. And from what I saw of the pictures, most of those rifles were you could break them down. So it wasn't like a hunting rifle. I guess I don't remember seeing a hunting rifle. I'd like to know how much ammunition he had up there. I mean, he only shot for 10 minutes, but shooting an automatic weapon for 10 minutes, how many rounds can you shoot? Thousands of rounds. And evidently he dropped a lot of rounds on people. He had it all figured out. He's been planning this for a long time. How do we figure this one out? How do we stop the next shooter?
Wasn't there another shooting somewhere in a school? Just last week?
I don't know.
Somewhere in Texas.
Really? Okay. Kid?
It was in college as well. College shooting.
I missed it. See, I miss all of this. Okay. So we're trying to figure out anything about this guy so we can figure out what's going on. You know these pictures, you know these guys. Historically, most homicides were committed by killers who were well acquainted with their victim, had a personal rational motive, killed once and were then arrested. And of course, if that's the case, we can look at the relatives of the individual that died and figure out who the perpetrator is, potentially. Because in most cases, we don't kill just random people. That doesn't happen very often. It's not like somebody comes up behind somebody and shoots them in the head. It hardly ever happens. Usually people kill people for a reason. And that reason has something to do with the fact that they know that person. That person has pissed them off. So we have to figure out what happened with the shooter in Las Vegas. Who was he pissed off at? That's what we're trying to figure out. I mean, you don't just shoot people for nothing.
Well, he was a professional gambler, so he was around a lot of people all the time. Maybe he got just really irritated with the dollar bill and the glamour and everything. You know, he lived 80 miles away.
I had the same thought over the weekend. I was thinking exactly the same thing. I have a feeling, why in the world would you shoot at all these people having a good time?
Because they're having a good time.
They're having a good time and you're unhappy with your life. Yeah. And this something triggered it a year ago because he started accumulating weapons and ammunition a year ago. So he's been pissed for a year. He scoped out three other concerts. So and they have 200 videos of him moving around Las Vegas, and he's never with anybody. He was wearing old black sweatpants and flip-flops.
A lone wolf?
Yeah, a recluse. You know, it's like the person that's lonely in the middle of all these people, and everybody's having a good time. Why would you go to Las Vegas? When you go to Las Vegas, it's party city, right? I mean, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. So, I mean, you've got all of these people making noise, and his job was what? What did he do for a living?
I thought he was retired.
He was a professional gambler.
Oh, yeah.
And what game did he play?
Slots?
No. No, you can't win at slots.
Poker?
Poker. He played video poker.
Video poker?
Video poker, yeah. Yeah.
Can you play at home?
I got the app.
Are you playing right now?
No, he played the machines. He played the machines. The machines are all programmed. And it's like playing a video game and going to the next level.
You played against other players.
Yeah. Well, it's like, yeah, but you see, you can keep going, getting better and better. It gets harder and harder and harder to win. The more you play on a select machine, the harder and harder it is to win. I know. So he would play a select machine until it started getting too hard for him to win, and then he'd go to another machine. But it had to be a cold machine. It had to be a machine that nobody had played for a while, so that it would go back to zero. So it would go back to the beginning. I mean, if somebody had a machine that never paid off because it was too difficult to win, then nobody would play it. These are addicting machines. You've got to win sometimes, or you won't continue to play. Nobody likes losing every time. I don't think. I don't know. I don't know why people gamble. I know, this is so strange. I keep thinking about this. I have a feeling he was a pathological recluse. And he hated people, but he was around them all the time. I mean, Las Vegas is a mess. There's just tons and tons of people, and they're all, half of them are drunk, and they do all kinds of strange things. The women don't have hardly any clothes on, you know, all this stuff is going on at all this time. And here he is, he's this ugly old man with black sweatpants and flip-flops on. Yeah, I can imagine he was pretty pissed off. Okay, so what are we doing here? Oh, this is, you recognize these people. These are the people that murdered the little 10-year-old girl. That's her mother, her mother's boyfriend, and her mother's boyfriend's cousin. And so it was the cousin and the boyfriend that raped and murdered the little girl and started to, but it was the mother that allowed them to do that, of course. She sold her daughter online, her little 10-year-old girl, and then of course they murdered her. You remember the case, hasn't come up yet, okay. A group of mass murderers. In the past 2 decades, increased attention has been paid to patterns of homicides involving killers who attack multiple victims, sometimes with irrational or bizarre motives, and who are much less likely to be apprehended than in former days because their victims are strangers. And of course, that's what happened in all of these cases. This is the Newtown murderer, the guy that went into a first grade class and shot all the kids. Who does that? Well, he did it. This is the guy that went into the Bible study in the black church, and at the end of the Bible study, pulled out a pistol and started shooting, killing people, the black parishioners. This is the guy that went into the movie theater in Aurora and just started blasting away at the people at the Batman movie. This is the guy that was down in Tucson and wanted to kill Representative Jeffers, and he shot her in the head, and then he started shooting other people around, killed a little 10-year-old girl. This is the guy that shot up Virginia Tech, killed 35 people. I don't know who that guy is. I'm not exactly sure. I tried to figure it out before class, but I couldn't find his picture anywhere. Anyway, that's Dylan Roof, the guy that shot up the black church in Charleston, South Carolina. A lot of strange people. They're shooting strangers, and if they shoot strangers, there's no way to connect them to anybody. Normally, people kill people that they know. Multiple homicides defined by Fox and Levine in 1998 as the slaying of 4 or more victims simultaneously or sequentially by one or a few individuals. 2 types of multiple homicides have been identified: mass murderers and serial murderers. The mass murderer kills 4 or more victims in one location during a few minutes to several hours. A mass murder remains relatively rare, of course, but it seems to happen more and more frequently because we see more of them. This is the guy that shot up Northern Illinois University. Went into a lecture, shot the professor, and then he started popping away at all the students. It was in a auditorium, and so he started popping away at students. I can't remember, I think he killed 11 or 12 people, and including himself. In the end, he shot himself. He looks like a happy guy, doesn't he? Evidently, he was pissed off about something. He wasn't a student there anymore, but he had gone to Northern Illinois, but he had never taken the professor that he shot. He just went into a classroom and shot the professor and started shooting all the students. It is estimated that about 2 mass murders are committed every month in the United States. That was in the 1990s, resulting in the death of about 100 victims annually. So mass murders, we were only seeing about 100 victims. Now it seems like we're seeing more. Well, we've got 59 from the killing in Las Vegas. So we'll see what happens in the 2000s. Although most mass murderers are not severely mentally ill, they do tend to harbor strong feelings of resentment and are often motivated by revenge against their victims. And of course, this is what we're looking for with the shooter in Las Vegas. We know that he was mad. I mean, he tried to blow up there was a whole vat of jet fuel that he tried to ignite that he couldn't, and it was on the other side of the auditorium, not the auditorium, but the area that where the concert was. And he shot it a couple times trying to get it to, with explosive bullets, but of course it didn't work. Anyway, so he had resentment against all those people, and he was seeking revenge, potentially. So this is what we have to look at. I mean, people don't just kill people for no reason whatsoever, unless, I guess, you're an assassin, in which case you do it for money. But normally people kill people because they resent them and because of the revenge factor. So this is what we're really looking for with this case in Las Vegas. This is the guy that shot up Aurora, of course. And almost 80%, the other kid was the kid that shot up Newtown. We didn't have a whole lot of pictures of him. He killed himself. He shot all the people at the elementary school, and then he shot himself. He had killed his mother earlier and taken the guns to the school, but his mother taught him to shoot, and that was one of the only fascinations he had in life was guns. He potentially had, they said he had autism, but the reality was he had Asperger's syndrome, and he was educable, certainly was educable. Why he shot up the first grade class, nobody knows. In almost 80% of mass murders, the assailant knew the victims. In many cases, the attack was a carefully planned assault. Usually it's a carefully planned assault. And this is part of the problem. They plan to go in and shoot their ex-wife. They plan to go in and kill the boyfriend of their ex-wife or whatever. They plan the assault out, and then once they get in there, they shoot one person. Now they realize they just keep going because they're dead anyway. They might as well just keep going. The typical assailant is killed at the location of the crime. They either commit suicide or they surrender to the police. So normally either the police kills them or they commit suicide. And of course, that's what happened in Las Vegas. The guy committed suicide. Rarely are they captured. This guy was captured because he was wearing body armor. The guy that shot up the theater in Aurora. He had just flunked out of a PhD program, a graduate program. Should we have recognized the fact that he might be somebody that wants to go in and... He was mad at the world.
Wasn't there tell signs when they interviewed people around him that they kind of said he was kind of off a little bit?
Yeah, well, usually usually that's what they figure out. But of course, we haven't figured that out as far as the guy in Las Vegas is concerned. You wouldn't have thought, why? I mean, there is no answer. And of course, we're still asking the questions and getting no answers. ISIS has claimed that he was one of theirs. Well, he seems to have had no connection to anybody, let alone, well, the only connection he had was with the Filipino lady, who was his girlfriend and didn't have a clue that he was going to do this, theoretically. Maybe she knows more than, well, we're trying to figure this out. She is still being interviewed by the FBI, and she'll probably be there for a while until we figure out what's going on. Spree killers are a special form of mass murderers in which the attacker kills victims at 2 or more different locations with no cooling off interval between the murderers. The killing constitutes a single event, but it can either last only a short time or go on for a day or more. This is one of the first spree killers that in the modern era. This is in 1958. That's a guy by the name of Starkweather, and this is his girlfriend, Caroline Fugit. Anyway, she was only 14 years old. He was working on her parents' farm. He decided they wouldn't let him date her. She was 14, he was like 18 or 19. And they wouldn't let him date her because they thought she was too young. So one day he went in and he killed both the mother and the father because they were madly in love, of course. They jumped in the family car and took off across Kansas. And when they needed money, they robbed stores and killed the store clerk. If they needed a car, they stopped at a farmhouse and killed the people there, and then they stole their vehicle. They finally caught them. It took them about 14 days to catch them, but they finally did. She's still in prison. Theoretically, she didn't kill anybody, but well, we're not exactly sure whether she killed anybody or not. But she's in prison for life. She's been in prison since 1958. He was executed, of course. I think the number was 14 people before they finally caught them. He actually killed a policeman who drew his gun, and he had him under his weapon, but somehow he was able to take the gun away from the policeman and shoot him. And then they started taking off in the policeman's car, as odd as that sounds. Anyway, that's a spree killer. We've had other spree killers, not a whole lot, in the United States. You may remember the case in 1998. The guy that killed Gianni Versace was a spree killer. It started out in Minnesota. This lasted for 3 months. We were looking for this guy for 3 months. And he would, every once in a while, he'd just kill somebody. It seemed to have something to do with his sexual orientation. He was gay, and he was killing older men who potentially he had had sex with. I guess he killed, I don't know, 5 or 6 people. But eventually he killed Gianni Versace. Then he committed suicide. His name was Andrew Cunanan. Interesting fellow. Anyway, that's the last spree killer I can remember. This is a picture of Richard Ramirez. He was a Satanist. But that's not why he killed people. He killed people because he had been conditioned by his brother and by his cousin to respond to violent situations. His brother was a Green Beret, and he brought back pictures of women that he had raped and murdered in Vietnam, and people that he had killed. Eventually his brother, and actually Richard was there, he's only 12 years old at the time, he was there when his Green Beret brother shot his wife in the face. I know. Yeah. So Richard became a really horrible spree killer. Well, he was I don't know, he was a serial killer. He was a rapist and murderer. And he would go in and rob people, and if there was somebody there, he would rape and murder them, or he'd just murder them, depending. Sometimes he'd have sex with the corpse. He wasn't very specific as to who he was attracted to. He just murdered. He was kind of a mess. Richard Ramirez. Serial murderers kill 4 or more victims, each on separate occasions. Serial killers usually select a certain type of victim who fulfills a role in the killer's fantasies. And of course his fantasy was violent death, was his fantasy. And of course that's what he did. He killed 14 people. He was called, this is the Night Stalker. You guys don't remember this. This is back in the 1980s. How you don't remember? You're more than alive.
I read the book.
Oh, you read the book. Okay. Yeah, he was a Night Stalker. Pretty nasty. They identified him by his bad breath. He had terminal bad breath or something. It wasn't terminal, obviously. He didn't die from that. He died of leukemia. They didn't execute him. He died of leukemia, strangely enough. There tends to be a cooling off period between serial murders. There are usually which are usually better planned than mass or spree killers. These guys plan out they scope out their victims. They figure out what they're going to do. Usually they take the equipment they're going to use to the site to murder them with. This is what Ted Bundy did. Ted Bundy had a rape kit that he would carry around with him, and he would bind his victims. And he would do the same thing over and over and over again with most of his victims. In the case of Ted Bundy, of course, we're talking about an individual who raped women that looked a lot like his initial girlfriend. Evidently that was the trigger that made him go off the deep end anyway. They all looked a lot alike. Serial murderers are difficult to apprehend because they seem normal. They seem like community members, normal community members. So I could be a serial murderer, you know. I seem like a normal person to you. Well, everybody but Brian. He reads me really well. So. Have I passed this thing around? Is this class?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, I forgot. Characteristics of a serial offender. This is Ed Kemper. Interesting guy. He's from Montana. He was living in California with his grandparents. His mother didn't want him, so they gave him to his grandparents. When he was 14 years old, he was out hunting, shot his dog by mistake. And he was so distraught when he came in that his grandmother said, well, you know, maybe you need to not carry that gun so much. You killed your dog. And he got pissed off at her, so he shot her and killed her. And then his grandfather came in when he saw what he did to his wife. He started yelling at Richard, and of course, Ed, and Ed shot him and killed him with his .22 rifle. And so he killed his dog and his grandparents at the same time. So they put him in juvie. He's only 14 years old. They put him in juvie. When he was 18, they released him, of course, because you can't hold a juvenile forever, despite the fact that he had 2 capital murders on his record. They sent him back to his mother. Of course, his mother didn't want him. I mean, she had shipped him away before. His mother was living with another lady, and Ed was offended by the fact that they were lesbians, and so he killed them both, and he cut his mother's head off and kept it under his bed. and then he would have unnatural sex with them. I know, sounds kind of horrible. So then old Ed, this is in Montana, so he jumps in his car and he drives down to California to where he had lived, Vacaville, where he lived before, which is where the prison is actually. He drove down to that area and he started picking up co-eds, hitchhikers, young women hitchhikers, and he would murder them and rape them, in that order actually. He was a necrophile, obviously, since he was having sex with his mother's head. Anyway. Ed Kemper. Okay, so there's some really ugly stories out there. Ed's still alive, by the way. They gave him life in prison, despite the fact that he murdered all these people, including his mother and his mother's girlfriend and his grandparents. Anyway, he's still in prison. Ed Kemper. What are we talking about? Oh, characteristics of a serial offender. More than half the murders were sexually motivated. They prefer to kill with hands-on methods, strangulation usually. They like to feel the life going out of these individuals. They don't normally use guns. They usually use a knife, or they'll strangle somebody. They may strangle them with a cord, but they need to feel the life leaving this select individual. They often keep souvenirs, sometimes in the form of body parts from their victims, to commemorate their savage acts. And of course, Richard Ramirez is famous for, a lady gave him a hard time. Evidently a lady pulled a shotgun on him. And unfortunately the shotgun wasn't loaded. And when he discovered what she did, he bludgeoned her to death, and he plucked out her eyes and he put them in a jewelry box, and he would carry that jewelry box around with her eyes and eyes. Who are these people? Why are they doing these horrible things? There's Ted Bundy. Other characteristics of serial offenders. Serial killers are not typically psychotic. Most, however, have personality disorders and lack the ability to experience empathy and remorse. So they do have antisocial personality disorder. Once upon a time, we used to call these people psychopaths. We don't anymore. We call them, we say that they have antisocial personality disorder. Serial killers often revel in the publicity that their crimes receive, and for that reason, a lot of times these individuals will do things in order to get in the news more frequently. This is the famous BTK killer. Beat, terrorize, and kill, I guess, or something. Anyway, his name's Dennis Rader. As you can see, he looks like just a normal guy. I know, it could be me. It could be a college professor. I think I took class. No. Okay. Anyway, he murdered 10 people over 30 years. And when they stopped talking about his murders, of course, that's what he's looking for. When they stopped talking about his murders, he started taunting the police with letters. Harassing them and telling them that they didn't know anything, and that he was so much smarter than they were. As much fun as that is.
Isn't that the Zodiac Killer? No,
I'm sorry?
He did the same thing.
I'm sorry?
Didn't the Zodiac Killer do
Yeah,
the same thing?
and we've never caught the Zodiac Killer. So he really is smarter than we are, than the public is. We've never caught the Zodiac Killer. But we hadn't caught him either. He turned himself in. Turned himself in after 30 years. And 10 murders. What a cool guy. Boy Scout leader. That's who you want to take care of your son. He was the president of the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita, Kansas. Nobody had a clue. Everybody was surprised. Some people said it wasn't him. But of course, he had information that only the killer could possibly have. He was one of the individuals that he was a necrophile. So he had sex with dead bodies. And that's one of the things that he would do. And he would write them a letter and say, you know, I went back to Susie Ann again. She's starting to get it a little right. But I had sex with her anyway. You know, this horrible, horrible stuff. Just taunting the police. The Green River Killer up in Washington was the same way. He was a necrophile. He would murder them, he would rape them, he'd murder them, and then he'd go back and have sex with the corpse. as god-awful as that sounds. Fox and Levine in 2005 have provided examples of different motivations for serial and mass murder. One of them is power, of course. They need power. They seek revenge for something. Loyalty is another reason for murder, as odd as that sounds. They're loyal to a cause, or they're loyal to something. Profit, of course, if they're an assassin, or they're just trying to terrorize people for one reason or another. Why would somebody want to terrorize people? Why would somebody do something? Why would they pull off one of these stunts to terrorize people? Why would that become a motivation?
Maybe they like the fear of seeing how the people react to the situation.
Where would it come from? This need to terrorize? This whole... Well, let's take it back to their childhood. And normally all this stuff comes out of somewhere. I mean, it's triggered by something. The problem with the guy in Las Vegas is he didn't start any of this stuff until he was so old. I almost said something else. He was a really old guy. I mean, he's 64. You know, your testosterone, usually a lot of this stuff is fueled by sex, is fueled by testosterone, by, so that kind of stuff. I mean, we normally don't send 50-year-olds out into a combat zone to attack the enemy. We'll probably not start limping, not be able to make it. We send 20-year-olds because they've got a testosterone that's sky high. And, just holding that gun raises your testosterone level. But this guy's 64. So where could terror come from?
I think Ted Bundy is kind of like a self-made person, because before he started having all these people follow him, he went to prison for petty crime.
Yeah.
And so he had, during that time, he learned how to play music, and then you get all these wannabe hippie people out there, that are just egging him on, and then with all the LSD.
I think you're mixing up Mason, what's his name?
Oh yeah, Charles Manson.
Charles Manson, yeah. Charles Manson and Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was the guy, the serial murderer that wandered around the country, raping co-eds.
Charles Manson, I think he just took too many drugs,
Could be. He was a lot older than the people that followed him, and you're right. Yeah, that could be the case of Charles Manson. But where would terror come from? What in your past would make you want to terrorize people?
Abuse.
In your childhood?
Abuse in your childhood?
Abuse in your childhood. You were terrorized as a child, so now you want everybody else to suffer what you suffer. I know. Seems kind of weird, doesn't it? We got to be careful. These are rational people, and the only way for us to figure out how they do things is not to go, it's pure evil. We can all say that about everything. That's what Trump said right after Las Vegas. He said that was pure evil. That doesn't help. Yes, it was an evil act, but we need to figure out rationally why this person did what he did so that we can stop it the next time. That's our job. As psychologists, and that's their job as law enforcement people. We need to figure this out, and we need to do this in a rational manner. We call it just pure evil. We got no questions answered, unfortunately. That's what Charles Manson was trying to do. Was it pure evil? There was a method to his madness. There's always a method to the madness, and that's what we need to figure out. Not forget about it, because it could happen again. This whole deal in Las Vegas, we got to figure this thing out so that we can stop it from happening the next time. And maybe you will have come in contact with this select individual, the next guy. And you will recognize it, because now we know that this is one of the symptoms. This is the way that these people act. So you'll go, wait a second. And sometimes all you need to do is ask them a question. It's like suicide. All you need to do is pay attention to these people, and they won't do it. It may be the same way with one of these guys, with one of these mass murderers. All you need to do is acknowledge them, is not ignore them. Because these people are invisible until they start killing people. Oh, wait a minute, I just found a reason for people to kill them. I don't have any idea. Flour, salt, yeast. Oh, what's happening? What are we making? A cake? Water. Looks like we're making a cake. Toast. I don't know. What do we get? I don't know. I stole this off the internet. Toastman, okay. Serial killer, inspired by sadistic fantasies. A man, we're talking about power and what they're looking for. In the case of a serial killer, he's inspired by sadistic fantasies. A man tortures and kills a series of strangers to satisfy his need for control and dominance. So that is a serial killer. Richard Ramirez very definitely fits in this category. He was an individual that was raised on all these strange post-Vietnam fantasies, and he put them all together. That is so weird. Mass murderer, pseudo-commando, what kind of power we're dealing with. Pseudo-commando dressed in battle fatigues and armed with a semi-automatic weapon. He turns a public area into a war zone. Probably he has no military background at all, but he has this fantasy of being a commando, of being a soldier. I don't know if he gets it from video games or where it comes from, but potentially, of course, this individual is, this is where he gets his power, by turning an area into a war zone. And potentially he can escape, but normally they don't escape. Normally they are trapped by the police, and a lot of times they want the police to kill them, but instead of that happening, they commit suicide, which potentially may have happened with the shooter in Las Vegas. But normally what we have is we have a long history with a mass murderer. We have a long history of obsessions with weapons and obsessions with the military. Serial killer, for revenge, if we're looking for revenge, serial killer, grossly mistreated as a child. A man avenges his past by slaying women who remind him of his mother. Usually it's, one of the things that we do know is that usually it's the mother that is the abuser, not the father. The mother is supposed to give you unconditional love, and if you've got a mother that is abusive, then that can really screw a guy up. That can really screw the son up. And sometimes he's striking back. So he is killing women that remind him of his mother, so that he's, in essence, he's killing his mother. In the case of Ed Kemper, he actually killed his mother. And then raped her, masturbated into her dead skull. As ugly as that is. Mass murderer, after being fired from his job, a gunman returns to his work site and opens fire on his former boss and co-workers because they're the ones that caused him to be fired. So he's looking for revenge. And we see this, somebody going postal. That's usually what is going on with a postal worker. I made the mistake of getting into a conversation with a guy on Facebook who was a former postal worker. And I'm afraid that I harassed him to the extent, or he harassed me. We were harassing each other. And I didn't realize how vulnerable he was. But the last message I got from him was, I'm not going to communicate with you anymore, but if you ever show up in Indiana again, I'm going to shoot you. I'm going to kill you. Which is a threat. I mean, I could have turned him in, I guess, but it just, yeah, I probably should have left the guy alone. I should have recognized what was going on. I'm not a very good psychologist, obviously. He had a lot of pictures of dead deer on his Facebook page. Deer that he had shot from 300 yards or whatever. So I know he can shoot things. I'm not the size of a deer. My head's a little bit bigger. My body's a little bit smaller. I know. So if I ever go back to, actually I was back in Indiana a couple of months ago, so, and he didn't hunt me down and shoot me, so I guess I'm okay. Maybe he didn't know. Okay. Serial killer, loyalty. Serial killer, a team of killers turns murder into a ritual for proving their dedication and commitment to one another. Of course, this is the case with Charles Manson and the Manson family, the famous Manson family. Mass murder, loyalty, a depressed husband, father, kills his family and himself to spare them from a miserable existence and bring them to a better life in the hereafter. And of course, that's what Andrea Yates was doing when she killed her children. She killed them because she was hoping that they would have a better life in the hereafter. And she was so tainted that she couldn't raise her children correctly. So she had to drown them all in the bathtub. Yeah, strange lady. For profit, serial killer, a woman poisons to death a series of husbands to collect on their life insurance policies. Of course, this has happened in the past. The famous Black Widow killer. Mass murder, a band of armed robbers executes the employees of a store to eliminate witnesses to their crime. What is she doing? The suspect burying witness, is that what it says?
Witness.
Oh,
Terror, serial killer, a profoundly paranoid man commits a series of bombings to warn the world of impending doom. That's what happened here. I don't see him. Where is he?
oh. Pardon.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that was training.
Jeez, I could have killed him. Mass murder, a group of anti-government extremists blow up a train to send a political message. And this seems to happen over and over and over again. This has happened in England lately. ISIS seems to be attacking them, trying to terrorize the people. And in France, of course, with Charlie Hebdo and then the attack where they attacked the concert. And they also attacked a soccer stadium at the same time, exactly at the same time. Okay, steps involved in criminal profiling. Let's figure out what's going on with these guys. Profiling inputs. The profiler collects all the information available about a crime. And of course, if you've ever watched any of these shows on television, this is what's happening. They're collecting micro evidence, looking for DNA, possibly, of the perpetrator. Decision process models. The profiler organizes the input. Of course, if you've ever watched NCIS, that's what Abby Shudo does. Somebody else goes out and collects the information. That's what the NCIS squad does. They bring it back and give it to Abby Shudo, and she organizes it into a profile. Crime assessment. On the basis of findings in step 2, the profiler attempts to reconstruct the behavior of the offender and the victim, of course. They're trying to figure out who they are and what the hell's going on with these two people. We have one dead, one is, of course, out there someplace, and they do it again, and you want to stop them from doing it again. Normally, as I said, if somebody kills somebody, they know the person. About in 80% of the cases, they knew somebody. They knew that person. Now, I'm sure the guy that shot up Las Vegas didn't know any of those people down on the street, the people that he was shooting at, the 567 people that were injured in that whole melee. But that's a different situation. Normally they know somebody, and sometimes they will kill the person that they know, that they want to kill, and then they realize that they're going out anyway, so they might as well go out with a bang, and then they just keep shooting. They go berserk, as it were. This video went viral. That video went viral. This is a Muslim lady, and this is in England. And that was a group of young men, and of course he's taking the trophy. She was walking down the steps going into the subway, and then they tripped her. Potentially could have really hurt her. And there you go, he's got his trophy. Brutal facial injuries point to a killer who knew their victim. In this case, of course, he not only didn't know her, but he couldn't even see her face. But there were, what, four boys, or were there 5? One, 2, 3, 4. 4. Wow. Actual case. So if there's a lot of facial damage done, then they probably knew their victim and they're trying to disfigure them. Murders committed with whatever weapon happens to be available are more impulsive than murders committed with a gun, and may reveal a murderer who lives fairly near the victim. If they, this may just be a happenstance murder. Somebody like Ted Bundy always had all of his weapons with him, all of the things that he was going to use in his crimes. He had it all planned out, and this is one of the reasons why he was so difficult to catch. Even though they had a profile of him. They actually caught him twice, and he escaped twice. He escaped both times. One time he jumped out of a second-story window. The murders committed early in the morning rarely involve alcohol or drugs, but any murder that is committed during the nighttime or in the early morning, that is usually a crime that has something to do with drugs and alcohol. That's when people drink. You don't get up at 8 o'clock in the morning, get drunk, and then go out and kill somebody. That's not usually what happens. This is usually a planned murder. So you can tell what was going on by what time of day the murder took place. If it takes place in the evening, right, doesn't have anything to do with alcohol or drugs as well. If it happens in the evening, it usually has something to do with work. Usually has something to do with that kind of a situation. I know, what a horrible picture. Criminal profile number 4, the profiler formulates an initial description of the most likely suspects. The investigation, a written report is given to investigators who concentrate on suspects matching the profile. So we're trying to profile these individuals. If we can come up with a profile, then potentially we can figure out who it is. It may be one of these group. You remember the movie The Usual Suspects? Well, that's really kind of an interesting movie because those are the guys that normally commit this type of a crime. And usually that's what the lineups are all about. They are the usual suspects, the usual individuals that commit these types of crimes. Apprehension, of course, the arrest of the suspect allows the profiler to evaluate the validity of their predictions. And of course, at that point, then they realize this is a good profile, this is what we did right, this is potentially what we did wrong. So from that, of course, they can learn from their mistakes. But if they've got, and this is a problem with profilers, sometimes these guys have a really big ego, and for that reason, they won't say, I made a mistake. In which case, they're going to continue to make that mistake. So it has to be somebody who is flexible enough to be able to learn from their mistakes. And not everybody is that flexible. Hamont and Kennedy in 1998 concluded that different kinds of crime scenes can be classified with reasonable reliability, and that differences in these crimes do correlate with certain offenders and offender characteristics, such as murderers, prior relationships, and interactions with victims. And this is usually where we start. We look at the relationships with the victim. Normally, remember, in 80% of the cases, so that means 4 out of 5 times you're going to get it right. One time it's going to be a stranger. But those aren't the ones we're worried about. We're trying to stop the 80%. So we look at the relationships. We look at what kind of interaction this individual had with this person. I'm your professor. You are my students. We have a relationship of sorts. Now, what if I end up dead? Who did it? I'm looking at you, Brad. We have a relationship. So potentially, if I was murdered, they would come in and they would look at all my students. They would look at all my students. They would try to figure out which one of my students can't be my wife. She's in Indiana. Okay, that's the only other relationship I have, I guess. Iowa. I'm sorry, she's in Iowa, not in Indiana. Anyway, so they would look at all you guys. You would be the #1 suspects. Who have I had a run in with lately? they would interview all of you and try to figure out who didn't like me, which ones of you didn't like me, who did I flunk last semester. That's what they try to determine, and that would be the major suspect. How about that? Logical? Sure. Yeah, I'm dead, so they're trying to figure out who did it. Now, of course, it's on the reservation. So who would be doing the investigating? Yeah, the feds are coming, FBI, and they're dumb as dirt. They're so stupid. They know nothing of the local area. They know nothing of the local culture. They are so dumb. Anyway, die, Helen, die. Okay. Note that many say that while criminal profiling is not scientifically reliable or valid, it can be a potentially useful tool in criminal investigation. Of course it can. You know, usually this is the way this takes place. We're looking for this select type of individual. We're looking for somebody who had something to do with the victim. There's no reason for him to be dead unless it was somebody that was looking for revenge. Remember, revenge is one of the primary reasons for killing somebody. But they would also check to see if I had any money on me. Because if I didn't, then they would go to my ATM and find out, well, you just got $200 out of the bank and now it's missing, so maybe it was robbery. Robbery was the cause of the confrontation. And that's the reason he's dead, because somebody was robbing him. How do psychologists learn about people's ability to detect deception? Researchers instruct some participants to lie and others to tell the truth. These stories are videotaped and shown to observers who then judge the truthfulness of those statements. So how accurate are these individuals trying to determine if somebody's a liar or if somebody's a truth teller? This is fun. How good are we at actually detecting this? There are profilers that say that they can interview somebody and tell when they're lying. How accurate are they? Are you ready for this? I know, this is kind of depressing. Bond and DePaulo in 2006 determined that people are correct only 54% of the time, hardly more than chance. 54% of the time. So I can detect somebody lying to me about half the time, a little bit better than half. People generally have a truth bias toward judging statements as being truthful. We want it to be truthful. What we want is what we will hear, and therefore we get it wrong. We don't know when people are lying to us. So who are we more likely to believe? Make a profile of somebody that we would all say they were telling the truth. What if we're talking about height? We have a tall guy, we have a short guy. Which one's lying? Who's telling the truth? As ugly as this is.
The short guy.
The short guy's a liar. What about a pretty guy and an ugly guy? Who's the truth teller?
Pretty guy.
Pretty guy. Okay. Now you know.
That's just
Yeah,
kidding.
now you know I'm
I
a
was
liar.
just joking.
Yes. No, not a liar. Okay, so we're looking for this. I mean, this is one of the reasons why they couldn't catch Ted Bundy. They did. They interviewed him over and over and over again, and he kept getting away with it. He kept lying to them. Why? Because he was smart and he was pretty. He was a good-looking guy. Nobody wanted him to be the bad guy. Even after they convicted him, he still escaped. Because they still didn't want him to be the bad guy. Subjects overall correctly classified 61% of the truthful statements as non-deceptive, but only 47% of the lies as deceptive. So what they were trying to do, they were trying to tell if a statement was a lie or if it was true. They identified the true statements 61% of the time, but they missed the lies 47% of the time. I know. So how good are we at doing this? If you look up to the left, you're trying to think of something to say. Well, sure you are, of course, but everybody does that. Does that mean you're lying? No, that's not what that means, unfortunately. But I mean, you can see things on the internet. They're trying to tell you how to read the lies in people. Most of it is pretty bogus. It's relatively bogus. Even professionals can't tell. They're just as bad as everybody else. Does being exposed to frequent deceit make one a better lie catcher? Trained observers are only slightly better than untrained observers. As confusing as that is. Averaging across studies, trained observers detected 58% of the truths and lies correctly, whereas untrained observers were correct about 53% of the time. So if you're a trained professional and you do this for a living, what's the probability that you're going to be able to tell if somebody's a liar? Just a little bit better than chance. Well, chance is 50%. As strange as that may seem. The hardest people some people are really good at lying. And I keep telling you guys the best liars are the people with antisocial personality disorder. But the second best liars are alcoholics. And if you talk to their families, they'll tell you that he's not an alcoholic. Yeah. So not only are they liars, but they make all the people around them stupid. They're not able to read them. There she is with a long nose. It's even longer than it was before. God, it's growing. People tend to have mistaken beliefs about verbal and nonverbal cues to deception. Avoiding eye contact is not generally a sign of deception. If you go up north and talk to the kids from the reservation, they don't make eye contact. They don't learn to make eye contact until they're in high school, until they're in college. Then they make eye contact. Before that, they won't make eye contact. Does that mean they're all liars? No, it just means that that's what they were taught. There are very few reliable nonverbal cues to deception, perhaps because people who are asked to tell the truth may also show signs of nervousness. So do lie detector tests work? No, because all it's doing is measuring how nervous you are. And if you're nervous about what you have to say, then it's going to look like you're lying. It doesn't really matter. You can beat a lie detector test if you put a tack in your shoe and you injure yourself by stepping on the tack. That will change everything, and it'll make you look like you're lying the whole time. What's your name? The whole time. Psychologists have had more success determining which verbal cues can reliably predict deceptive behavior. A large amount of reported detail is indicative of truthful reports. Truth tellers are more likely than liars to say that they can't recall certain details. So if somebody remembers everything, they're probably making something up. Liars also tend to speak in a higher pitched voice and make more speech errors, slips of the tongue, than truth tellers do. And of course, that is one way to detect it. But of course, if you make a slip of the tongue, does that mean you're a liar? No, it doesn't. But it's more likely that if you do have a slip of the tongue, then that part of what you're saying isn't true. How's that? I know you're lying because your lips are moving. That's so funny. Cognitive load interviews can enhance our ability to tell truth tellers from liars. Cognitive load interviews mentally tax a person. It becomes difficult to simultaneously answer a question and to maintain a lie at the same time. By making a subject think harder in an interview, investigators have been able to more accurately discriminate liars from truthful interviewees. And this is one of the reasons why they keep them in there for 3 or 4 hours. And they'll ask them really tough questions. And the reason they're doing that is to make them think. The more that you can only think of one thing at a time. Remember, you can only think of one thing at a time. So if you're trying to maintain a lie and you're making them talk about something else, while they're talking about something else, they're not thinking of the lie. So if you're talking about something else and then all of a sudden you go back to the original question that they've been lying about, they're more likely to slip. And this is an interviewing technique that we see sometimes on television. This is an interrogation technique. You can only think of one thing at a time. You can only keep one thing in your mind at a time. You can't do two things at once. If you're doing two things at once, you're probably bouncing back and forth between one thing and the other. This is one of the reasons why driving and texting is not a good idea. You can listen to the radio because most of the time you're not really listening to the radio. I listen to books on tape in my car. I know that's fun. Another approach to detecting deception exploits the fact that liars prepare themselves for anticipated questions. Asking unanticipated questions can be an effective way to reveal a liar. And of course, we have seen television shows. Who was the guy that was really good at that? Played by Richard Falk, the guy with a real rumpled coat. That was what he would do. He would ask them questions, and I'd say, "Oh, okay," and he would accept anything that they said. And then he would start to leave, and he said, "Oh, just one more thing." And of course, they think that they've already fooled him. And then he comes back with another question, and potentially they talk for an extended length of time. And of course, they're lying to him the whole time. And then he'll go, "Oh, okay," and he'll accept everything that they say. And then, who was that guy? It's a great show. Anyway, that's how he used to get figure out that they were lying. When observers viewed responses to unanticipated questions, they correctly classified 80% of the truth tellers and the liars. They could not distinguish truth tellers from liars at above chance levels when viewing answers to anticipated questions. So if it's an unanticipated question, then they're less likely to be able to fool you because they haven't thought about it. And then they'll go, they won't be able to think of the right thing. They will stumble over their answers, and then you know that they're lying. Using the polygraph to detect deception. The polygraph, the lie detector, is a computer-based machine that measures blood pressure, electrodermal activity on the skin, and respiratory changes during questioning. And of course, you can fool this machine by changing all of these things in yourself. Now, normally you're just sitting there relatively comfortable, but if you do something like you put the tack in your shoe, or you have a hangnail that you're playing with, so anytime you get a question you don't like, or any question at all, you can hurt yourself. And if you hurt yourself while you're taking the lie detector test, it'll give you erroneous results. There's a guy that uses a lie detector test. Who is that? I saw it the other day on television. And they will ask these people questions, did you beat your daughter or something? And then they'll give him a lie detector test. And they'll say, you flunked whatever. I saw it on television. I was waiting for my car to be fixed over the summer. I never watch this stuff on television. The problem with the polygraph is that the physiological manifestations of various negative emotions, such as fear, guilt, and anger, are all very similar. And you can't tell the difference between fear, guilt, and anger. Now, you assume that it's guilt. That's what you want it to be, guilt, so that the lie detector test actually works. But it could also be fear or anger that is kicking the thing off. Simply being suspected of committing a crime, even if innocent, may generate a lot of emotion, of course. Although there are concerns about the validity of the polygraph, it is still widely used within the criminal justice system. We still use it. But in most states, you can't use it as evidence. Polygraph techniques, the control question test is composed of relevant questions which inquire about the crime under investigation, and comparison questions which are calculated to induce an emotional reaction because they cover common misdeeds. Prior to the age of 21, did you ever do anything that was dishonest or illegal? That could be a question that you can ask this individual, so that it's setting a precedent. So you see how they answer this question if you knew they have a criminal record before the age of 21, and of course that will set a baseline that you can read. Most polygraphers consider a denial to a comparison question to be a known lie, thereby
providing a characteristic physiological response to a lie. So what they're looking for is the same pattern over and over again. They get the same pattern for a known lie as they get for a question that they ask. They assume that you were lying the second time. The expectation is that guilty subjects should be more aroused by the relevant questions to which they must respond with a lie in order to maintain their innocence. The hardest people to give a polygraph test to are people who have antisocial personality disorder. These individuals do horrible things to people or things or animals, and they have no empathy at all. So these individuals are almost impossible to catch as far as the polygraph is concerned. They do not react emotionally to anything. They'll strangle a cat to death without any emotion. A kitten to death without any emotion. Whereas innocent subjects should be more aroused by the comparison questions because they will worry that admitting to a past misdeed might make them look more like a criminal. And of course, if that is the case, then you also have a bad polygraph test. Concealed knowledge test, the goal is to detect the presence of concealed knowledge in the suspect's mind, not to be detecting lying, not to detect lying. The polygrapher presents a series of multiple choice questions. Each answer would appear equally plausible to an innocent person, but the true criminal will, in theory, be revealed by heightened physiological reactions that accompany recognition of concealed knowledge. In other words, they keep asking them questions. As far as an innocent person is concerned, all the answers are equal. But as far as the guilty person is concerned, in the multiple choice questions, there is one answer that is more plausible than another, and because of that, they will have heightened arousal. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to show that this individual is reacting to those types of questions. There are limitations to concealed knowledge tests. This technique can be used only when the details of the crime have been kept from the public. Even then, it is possible that the suspect is not the perpetrator, but rather was told about the crime by the true criminal. It is also possible that some guilty subjects pay so little attention to the details of their crimes that they actually lack the information on which this method relies. This actually only works, or it especially works if you have an individual that collects souvenirs, and you know his profile. And so you can use that profile to determine if he is the guilty party by what he says and what he doesn't say. This is one of the ways we caught Ted Bundy, because it was a criminal profile. He had a criminal profile, and they used that criminal profile to question him, and that's why they eventually caught him. We need to stop right here, and we'll pick this up next time. I'll try to finish this chapter. I know I'm way behind, but I will probably blame everybody but me. I have to finish your grades.